Hello again. Today's topic is utilitarianism. I don't know whether you have heard about that worldview. And this picture is a very typical example of utilitarianism. Okay, let's see. The train is coming at a very fast speed. But now you see two different options. Unfortunately, here lies 5 people. And if the train just goes straight, and the people can die, of course. But he can change the railroad, okay? But here you have only one person. Now, he has to make a decision, yeah, what to do. Whether he lets the train just go on the same road, or he can change so that the train goes this road. What is your option? What is your decision? That is the issue of utilitarianism. Okay? This is very famous example of Professor Sandel of Harvard University, who has written a book, What is Justice? In that book, he explains utilitarianism with this example. So I have quoted this picture again. Now, I want to share with you one presentation of the former students that I found very good. It is also English and Korean both, so it can be very useful. I skipped the first one, but these are the main contents. What it is, what are the strong points and weak points, and the Christian alternatives. So, what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is not a comprehensive worldview, but rather it's an ethical theory, especially social ethics, what to do in our society. Well, the basic presupposition is that everyone seeks happiness. Everyone wants pleasure rather than pain. Everyone wants happiness rather than misfortune. Okay? That is the base, that is the foundation. So, it is a theory in normative ethics holding that the moral action is the one that maximizes utility. Maximizing the utility means maximizing the happiness of the greatest people. Okay? That's the basic idea. Now, here you see the background of this worldview. Originally, you can trace back to the ancient Greek thinkers like Epicurus or Aristotle, who argued that the happiness or pleasure is the most important virtue in human life. So that is the greatest, the ultimate good of human behavior and ethics. And that has been developed when, especially in England, where the first industrial revolution took place. Okay? Then you have a lot of problems, of course. Yeah? It is the beginning of the main capitalism, and the rich people became richer and the poor people became poorer. Of course, here Karl Marx tried to criticize this laissez-faire capitalism, yeah, with his own idea of communism, or socialism, and materialistic worldview, right? But on the other hand, there are two main human-centered worldview. It is so-called rationalism in the continent. It's represented by René Descartes in France, but René went to the Netherlands later. And that is the human reason-centered worldview. Whereas in England, human experience is more important. So you can say the British empiricism and the continental rationalism are the major philosophical trends at that time. But those two traditions became one by Immanuel Kant in Germany. It is called idealism, but also Kant started the so-called the Enlightenment movement, trying to make a human reason, understanding, and experience the central factor of the whole view. The divine or theological or the church business is excluded. Only our thinking, our experience is the most important. So from here you have these kinds of worldviews, and then came utilitarianism, so-called. Well, that is actually to defend Adam Smith, the wealth of the nation theory, the liberal economical and capitalistic worldview. Whereas Karl Marx tried to criticize this kind of capitalistic liberalism. So utilitarianism tried to defend against the attack of socialism. Now, who is the main thinker of this worldview? The first and the most important thinker is Jeremy Bentham, and he has published this book, An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation. Here, he argued the so-called quantitative utilitarianism. Why quantitative? Because he thought that human happiness and pleasure can be quantified. Okay? So, for instance, it is explained like this in his book, chapter 1, page 14. He said, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasures. And it is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. So he distinguished two important masters of human life, whether we receive pain or pleasure. Pleasure you can change with the word happiness. Okay? So, how do we know pain and pleasure? How can we calculate? And Jeremy Bentham has developed these 5 criteria to calculate pain or pleasure. First, intensity. How strong is that pleasure? Duration. How long can it go on, dure? Certainty or uncertainty. How certain or how uncertain is that happiness? Propinquity or remoteness. How far is that happiness from us? fecundity, how productive, purity, how pure and essential is that, and extent, how large, how big is that pleasure. So according to Jeremy Bentham, you can use these 7 criteria and measure each pleasure so that you can make the right decision. Okay? So he argued the fundamental rule of utilitarianism. That is to say, act always to promote the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Well, this can be applied not only to individual but also to the government, to the society. When government, tries to establish or try to start a new policy, what is the main concern of the government? Well, how can we maximize of the majority people, right? Because that is the rule and criteria. So that is so-called quantitative utilitarianism, right? And also it helped a lot to develop democracy later on, because Jeremy Bentham tried to reform the election system, political election system in England. But it has some problem. Why? Because sometimes it's very difficult to measure in terms of quantity. How can you measure love? How can you give a number to your pain? Sometimes it's very difficult. And there is also qualitative difference. That was argued by John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill was the son of James Mill, his father. James Mill was a disciple of Jeremy Bentham, right? And when John studied and made a research on utilitarianism, he found out that the pleasure can have different dimensions. Okay? For instance, the pleasures of the intellect are intrinsically superior to physical pleasures. That means that sometimes our mind, our spirit needs more satisfaction than our physical needs. And our spiritual needs are more important. Yeah? For instance, when Jesus was tempted by Satan in the wilderness, before he started his public ministry, Satan came and said, you can change this stone into bread because you are so hungry after 40 days. But what did Jesus say? No, man shall not live by bread alone, but by the word of God. So the word of God is more important than bread, right? So the famous expression in his book called Utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill said like this: it is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig. It's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Here, human being is more important, superior to a pig, because human being is a personal being, has free will, so qualitatively it's different. And also Socrates, famous philosopher, the philosophical value is more important than the physical value, right? So His view is called qualitative utilitarianism. So let me just take a short break, and I will continue to the strong and weak points and the Christian alternatives.